Hey guys, tonight we're going back to a time before kings, before pyramids, before farming, when fire was still a wild invention and death lived in every shadow. We're diving straight into the Stone Age, not the Saturday morning cartoon kind with pet dinosaurs and perfect teeth, but the real one, cold, bloody, and quiet. A time when you didn't name your children until they'd survived 2 winters, because most didn't. When a toothache could kill you, and childbirth often did. When you fought to eat or were eaten, and the only gods you prayed to were carved in mammoth ivory and stained with ochre and ash. But it wasn't all horror, it was genius. It was humanity in its rawest form, firelit, starving, enduring. We're about to spend one day as a Paleolithic human, a Cro-Magnon in Ice Age Europe, and you'll never look at your warm bed, your fridge, or even your hands the same way again. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up to the crack of ice, not birdsong. Your breath fogs in front of your face like smoke from a dying fire, and for a moment you don't know if it's morning or the world ending. The cave is cold, always cold, even though the hearth still glows with the embered remains of last night's fire. You can feel the warmth only when you press your back to the stone near it. Otherwise, the cold lives under your skin, behind your teeth, in the ache of your joints. Your name doesn't matter. You were not given one like the names we use today. You are known by scent, by memory, by gesture, a scar on your cheek, the way your feet move over frozen ground. You are 16 winters old. If you live to 25, you'll be considered ancient. You rise slowly, careful not to wake the others, your mother, who snores softly, her face lined and split by frostburn. Your little brother, half covered in a hide stitched with bone needles. And the old man, not your blood, but older than anyone has a right to be. He sleeps closest to the fire. He always does. His skin is like leather. You wonder sometimes if he is becoming stone, like the flint blades he sharpens. You step outside. The wind howls over the steppe like something hunting. There's snow, but not the soft, friendly kind. This is crusted, sharp-edged snow that bites bare feet. Your feet are wrapped in sinew-bound furs, and still it hurts, but you're used to it. Pain isn't special here. It's the price of waking up. You scan the horizon. Mammoth country. Somewhere out there, a small herd is migrating south, dragging behind them a season's worth of meat, hide, and bone. You don't hunt them, not yet. You're not ready, but the others will. The men, the women, anyone strong enough. If you're lucky, you'll carry something. If you're lucky, you'll come back. Behind you, the cave smells like smoke and unwashed skin. The air outside smells like nothing. No scent means no danger. If the air smells like iron, it means blood. If it smells like musk, it means predator. If it smells like rot, it means someone didn't make it through the night. A flake of snow lands on your arm. You watch it melt. Time to work. You're part of the morning crew, 3 others your age. You walk east along a narrow ridge, eyes peeled for tracks. Anything edible is a blessing. Rabbit, bird, maybe a ptarmigan if you're lucky. You carry a sling, a stone blade, and a gut string net wound tight around your shoulders. The others don't talk. They grunt, they whistle. Words are used sparingly, too many, and the spirits might listen. You believe this, even if you pretend not to. The The sun never rises, all the way this time of year. It limps across the sky like a half-dead wolf. Light comes in shades of blue and grey, rarely gold. Shadows stretch long, even at noon. You find tracks, rabbit, fresh. Your friend, the one with the twisted ankle, from a fall last moon, signals silently. You nod, you move, you squat low and uncoil the net. You move it with practiced silence, setting the stones to weigh it just right. The others fan out. You've done this dance a dozen times, maybe more. Suddenly, a snap, a blur of motion, the rabbit darts. You throw, miss, but the boy beside you does not. He slams the sling stone into the animal's skull, and it folds like wet paper. You move fast, slice, bleed, gut. The warmth of the creature steams in the air. You pocket the liver. You always eat the liver fresh. Raw. It's the warmest thing you'll feel all day. Blood on your hands. You lick it off without thinking. Protein is protein. You walk back with 2 hairs and a handful of bitter root dug from under a tree. A decent haul, enough for the children to gnaw on anyway. When you return, the old man is speaking low to a girl who burned her hand the night before. He smears ash and bare fat into the wound. She hisses. He hisses back. It's how healing works. Your mother nods to you and hands you a sharpened flake of obsidian. She wants you to clean the rabbit, not gut that's already done. She wants you to tan. You hate tanning. You stretch the hide across a wood frame lashed with sinew. You scrape it clean. It smells like piss and old meat. Your hands are numb by the end, but you don't stop. There's no stopping, unless you're dead or about to be. Nearby, a woman gives birth. It's not private. Nothing is. The midwife is younger than you'd expect. A girl barely older than you. She chants softly, smearing ochre on the mother's belly. The sound of pain echoes off stone. A child's first cry follows. You don't look. You don't have to. You've heard both versions before, the cry of a living child or the silence of one that didn't. Tonight, you'll eat meat. Not much. A few bites. Enough to feel warm, maybe. The elders will tell stories by firelight, the same ones mostly, of the time the mammoth fell into the gorge and shattered its ribs, and they ate for 12 days straight. Of the cave spirit who steals voices in the night. Of the man who touched fire and didn't burn. You'll laugh, you'll nod, you'll pretend the story is new, because that's what you do. Because it's cold, and you're human, and the story helps you forget that tomorrow you might not wake up. But tonight, you will. Tonight, you are alive. And that's not nothing. The fire is alive again, and that changes everything. You can feel its rhythm before you see it, the slow hiss of wet wood, the pop of fat from last night's bones catching flame. It gives the cave a second skin. Dancing shadows on stone walls that have seen too much to care. The smoke doesn't rise. It curls along the ceiling and slinks through the exit like a thing that's trying to escape. You sit near the warmth. Not too close, that's for the elders, the ones with the stories and the knowledge of where the land folds open and where it eats you alive. You sit near enough to feel it, but far enough that you know your place. A hare's leg is roasting on a spit, or at least what's left of it. Most of the good meat went to the hunter who made the kill, and to the old man with the shaking hand who hasn't eaten in 2 days. That's the rule. Hunters eat, the sick eat, the strong carry everyone else. You chew a strip of sinew. It tastes like nothing and takes longer than it's worth, but it keeps your jaw busy and that keeps your stomach from screaming. Across the fire, the woman with the birth-bloated belly cradles something wrapped in fur. The child is sleeping, alive. That alone is a victory. There is no ceremony, no celebration, not yet. You wait a few days first. Naming comes later, when you're more certain the thing won't die. You glance toward the rear of the cave. That's where the dead are kept, at least for a while. It's a quiet part of the world. Nobody talks much there. You went once, when your cousin drowned crossing a river still clutched by spring ice. They burned sweetgrass, and her brother painted her eyelids with ash so her soul wouldn't be blind in the dark. She was 8. Death isn't the worst thing here. It's just the most frequent. The old man clears his throat, a sound like rocks tumbling down a hillside, and that means it's time for the story. He doesn't tell it every night, only when something matters. Only when something needs remembering. Tonight, something matters. He starts slow, not with words, but with breath. One long inhale, one exhale through blackened teeth. Then he reaches for the pouch of ochre red like blood, ground from stone, mixed with spit. He dips 2 fingers in and begins drawing on the wall. The fire flickers behind him. The story is half in his mouth, half in the shapes he draws. The wide curve of a mammoth's back, the twin crescent tusks, a small stick figure with a spear. You've seen it before, but not like this. Tonight, he adds something new. A line of dots beneath the mammoth's belly, a long arc of motion. It means movement. It means the beast turned too late. It means it bled. He grunts, and someone adds a rhythm, a log tapped with a femur. Another joins in. The sound builds. You feel it in your spine. Then he speaks. Not in your voice, not in the common tongue, but in the low throat chant used only for sacred things, the language of gods, or ghosts, or maybe just memory. You understand enough. The hunt was long. The cold bit the youngest. They walked for 3 days. The beast fell. The blood steamed. They thanked the spirit of the animal. They dragged its bones home. You feel it. You were not there, but you are now. That's the point. Every mark on the wall is a footprint in time. Every chant is a tether across generations. This is how knowledge survives the frost. Beside you, someone weeps. Not from sadness, from awe. You lie back, letting the fire paint your face in gold and shadow. The smell of meat, of smoke, of blood, of ash, it's your lullaby. But there's no sleep yet. Not tonight. Later, you leave the cave a small group, chosen by the elder who painted. A ritual. Not a punishment. Not exactly. It's your first time. You're handed a torch. A bundle of resinous wood, wrapped tight and burning slow. The others hold their own. The light barely cuts the dark, but that's part of the point. The cave is deeper than you thought. You knew it stretched past the fire pit, but you never walked this far before. The ground dips, then curves, then narrows. You squeeze sideways at one point. The air is colder here, wetter. The stone sweats. Your fingers brush against carvings, spirals, hands, a bird with no eyes. You stop in front of a chamber that opens like a mouth. And there it is. A painting. Older than your mother. Older than her mother. Maybe older than anyone who still walks. It shows a hunt, but not like the elder's version near the hearth. This one is bigger, stranger, more alive. The animals twist in impossible motion, legs blurred, eyes wide, mouths open. There are too many limbs. Some of the figures wear masks, antlers, beaks, snouts. You're told that's what they become. during the trance. You don't speak, you don't move. One of the others kneels and places a hand on the stone, fingers splayed. Another paints around it a red outline, burning in the torchlight. You do the same. The ochre is cold, sticky. Your handprint joins the others. You belong now, not just to the people around the fire, to this, to the story, to the place carved from rock and fear and memory. When you return, the stars are gone, hidden behind a sky that hangs like wet hide. Snow drifts sideways. The wind has teeth. You're handed a chunk of frozen marrowbone and told to chew it. It tastes like old salt and survival. The baby still lives. Someone tied a tooth around its neck, Wolf, maybe for strength. You lie down near your mother, who mutters a name in her sleep that doesn't belong to anyone living. You don't ask. There's no word for peace in your tongue, no word for safety, but there's a word for endure. You whisper it once before sleep takes you. You hope it listens. You wake up bleeding. It's not much, just a line of red along your wrist where the edge of the flint caught you in your sleep. You must have rolled wrong, or the knife shifted from where it was tucked beneath your bedding. It happens. It doesn't mean anything, but still, your breath catches. Blood means many things in your world. Life, food, death, a message, a warning, a promise. You squeeze your hand. The wound opens wider, then closes, still shallow. It will heal. You lick it once, taste the salt, and move on. Outside, the snow has turned to rain, not soft, warm rain, but half-frozen sleet that soaks through fur and chews through bone. You curse it under your breath, but the sky doesn't care. No one does, really. Not right now. Because today is a hunt day. Real hunt. Not rabbit, not Roots mammoth. You've never gone on one before, not as anything but a watcher, a shadow. But today, your name was spoken during the morning meeting. A grunt, a nod, a glance from your mother you didn't quite understand. You're in. You don't ask why. You don't ask if you're ready. Those questions are for people who have a choice. You tie your furs tight, double wrap your feet, and grip the spear with both hands. It's not yours, it belongs to the clan. Passed down. Hardened wood, stone tip, leather grip that's been smoothed by 100 hands before yours. You won't throw it, you'll carry it. You're still not that trusted. There are 7 of you. 2 women, both fierce, both quiet, both mothers. 1 older man, with a back bent like tree roots and a voice like gravel. 3 young men, no older than you. And then the tall one. No one knows how many winters he's seen. He speaks less than a rock and walks like he already knows where the beast will fall. You follow him. The air grows still as you leave the cave behind. Sound dies in the snow. It's like walking inside someone else's breath. For hours, you move without speaking. Only hand signals, eyes on the ground. You learn to see what you didn't before. The angle of a hoofprint, the twist of broken grass, the shine of piss frozen midstream. The tall one kneels once, presses his ear to the earth. When he stands, you all follow. You come to the edge of the gorge by midday, and there it is. Not a herd, not this time, just one. A lone mammoth, separated from the rest. Old, tusk chipped, fur matted with mud and ice, but it's massive, towering. A creature pulled from a myth and still breathing. It doesn't see you yet. The plan is simple, which means it's dangerous. Drive it toward the drop. Use noise, fire, pressure. Make it run the only way it can toward death. You light the torches. You scream. You bang stones together. The air fills with chaos. And the mammoth does exactly what you need it to do. It panics. It charges forward, but not toward the gorge. Toward you, you freeze. Just for a second, a single heartbeat, but it's enough. The older man shoves you hard, and you fall sideways into the snow as the beast thunders past. So close you smell the musk on its hide. The spear's gone. You don't even remember letting go. The ground shakes. The tall one moves like lightning. His torch lands near the beast's eye, flaring bright. It stumbles, veers. The gorge yawns ahead. And then it happens. One leg slips, then another. The ground gives way, and the mammoth falls. The sound it makes is not a roar, not a scream. It's deeper. It's like the sky groaning open. The body hits the rocks below with a sound that makes your teeth ache. Then silence. No cheering, no celebration, just the slow shuffle of feet, the careful climb down. You follow. The air near the corpse is warmer, from the blood. It steams in the cold, a red mist rising like breath. You're told to help with the skinning. It's hard. The hide is thick, thicker than anything you've touched. Your knife feels dull after the first few cuts. The fat is yellow, the muscle dark. You learn the order. Skin, meat, organs, then bones. Every piece is taken. Nothing wasted. You fill a bladder with blood. You tie sinew into bundles. You crack femurs with a boulder to get to the marrow. You hold the still warm liver in your hands, knowing someone will eat it raw before the day ends. You gag once, then you get over it. This is what survival looks like. Not clean, not glorious. Real. It takes hours. By the time you return, the light is gone. You carry what you can, a shoulder joint wrapped in hide, a bag of entrails tied with gutstring. You smell like death, but it's a good smell. It means the others will eat tonight. The children, the old man, the new mother, the girl with the burn. You might not get the best cut, but you'll get something. And more important, they saw you. You didn't run. You stood. You bled. Later, as you sit by the fire, your mother places a hand on your shoulder. She doesn't speak. She doesn't have to. You've passed something. Not a test. There are no tests here. Only chances, moments. You took yours. You lie down near the fire and close your eyes. The world still smells like blood, but tonight you don't mind. You've earned the right to rest. It's not just about one day. One hunt, one meal, one lucky moment. Survival in your world is a system messy, fragile, brutal, stitched together from knowledge, trial, and the slow inheritance of pain. You don't survive because you're the strongest. You survive because someone else, long before you, figured out how not to die and passed that wisdom along like fire in a cupped hand. And now it's your turn to hold it. Water comes first. Always. There's a stream not far from the cave downhill, beyond the alder grove, where the tracks of deer run wide and tangled. It freezes over in the winter, but you've learned where to break it, how to dig through snow without falling in. You know the sound it makes when it flows thin and dangerous, a whisper, not a rush. You never drink directly. You let it settle in the bladder pouches carried on the backs of the younger ones. Then, sometimes, you filter it through woven grass, a layer of charcoal or snow itself. You don't know why this helps. You just know that people who don't do it often stop waking up. There are rules, silent ones. Never drink water where you see dead things nearby. Never drink water that smells like metal or eggs. Never trust stillness. Next comes fire. You don't think of it as magic, but it is. Even now, even with all the practice, you're never completely sure if the spark will catch. You carry fire like treasure wrapped in moss, packed in resin and birch bark, smouldering deep in a hollow stone bowl. If it dies mid-journey, it's not your failure, it's a curse, an omen. You've seen men cry because a coal went out too soon. You've cried yourself. There's a trick to keeping it going, feeding it just enough, not too much, breathing on it, whispering to it sometimes, not for luck, but for timing, for focus. You rub flint against iron pyrite, or sometimes quartz, letting the spark land on dry tinder. You cup your hands like you're holding a newborn. You blow soft, then harder, until the moss glows like a living thing. Fire is everything. Warmth, cooking, protection, story. It's not just a tool, it's the heartbeat of your people. When the fire dies, something inside everyone dies with it. Food is never a guarantee, not even after a successful kill. The mammoth fed you for days, but you can't live off meat alone. Your stomach bloats, you get sick, you need fat, roots, berries, bone broth, fermented bits of anything that won't kill you. Sometimes you eat bark or moss boiled until it tastes like nothing. You remember the hunger moon when the snow was high and the animals all gone. That's when you learn to eat your fear. Literally. The gut of a fox, frozen solid, split with a stone and swallowed raw. Disgust disappears when death gets close. Preservation is its own art. You don't salt food, there's no salt to spare, but you do dry it. You hang strips of meat over smoke, or bury it in cold ground wrapped in bark. You ferment roots in pits lined with leaves and marked with stones, so you remember not to dig them up too soon. You've seen food stolen, not by animals that's expected, by people, desperate ones. There's no law here, only consequences. And when someone takes what isn't theirs, what children needed to survive, those consequences can end in blood. Injury is a different kind of fear. Not just the pain. You can survive pain. But infection, that creeping death that smells like rot and kills without noise, that's the real terror. You keep wounds clean. You smear them with bear fat mixed with charcoal. You bind them in moss. You change wrappings daily. You watch for heat, for red lines running toward the heart. You know what it means when a wound sings. It means death is near. But you've seen miracles too. A boy who broke his leg falling from a rock, he was carried, fed, guarded. His leg healed crooked, but he walks now. Slowly, but he walks. You respect that more than strength. Endurance means everything. Women know healing best. Not because they're weak, because they're observant. Because they listen to plants and silence. They know which roots numb the tongue, which bark stops bleeding, which mushrooms give visions or kill. They don't talk about it. They don't need to. Seasons are your calendar. Not months, not dates. Smells, light, the way the air moves. You know when spring is near, because the snow starts to smell like soil, because the sun lingers longer in the mouth of the cave, because the birds return not singing, but watching. They always watch before they make noise. Summer means insects, biting ones, eggs buried in wet flesh. You've seen maggots used to clean wounds. You've also seen them eat someone alive. Autumn means harvest. Of bones, of wood, of everything you might need to not die. You dig deep then, deeper than food, into memory. You check traps, you store fat, You dry everything. You watch the sky like it might speak. And maybe it does in colour, in birds flying south, in the way wolves grow bolder. Winter never knocks. It just arrives. One day, the wind changes. Then everything else does too. People sleep closer. Fire burns longer. Words are used more carefully. You've learned what matters most during the frozen months. Sleep, warmth, kindness. Because people go mad in the cold. They start to see things, faces in the dark, voices in the snow. You once watched a woman walk naked into a storm because she thought her dead son was calling her. They found her fingers first. And sometimes the cold breaks more than bodies. It breaks groups. Arguments start over meat, over fire, over silence. And when they do, someone leaves, or is made to leave. You know what that means. Exile. It's worse than death, because it's slower, because it's alone. But even then, even in the worst cold, when someone is shivering near the edge of the cave, too weak to speak, someone else will pass them a bone, a skin, a hand. Because survival isn't strength. It's the choice to share what little you have, to build something fragile and terrible and beautiful called us. You've learned that survival is never a single act. It's a ritual, a rhythm, a set of repeated gestures handed down so many times that even the gestures have ghosts. And nowhere is that clearer than when food meets fire. The first cut of a kill that matters. It always goes to the one who struck the blow, or their closest kin. But even they don't eat it right away. It's offered first to the fire, to the ancestors, to the shape shadows that live just past the edge of the known world. A piece of fat or bone or liver placed gently in the flames while the smoke curls upward, as if the spirits are hungry too. You don't ask questions about this. You just watch. You mimic. That's how you learn. Some things are explained, most aren't. Like the red stones arranged in a circle just outside the cave, never stepped on, never disturbed, or the ash marks on the foreheads of infants, painted with 2 fingers, or the way the old woman whispers over the stew pot at night, as if she's telling secrets to the marrow. Food has to be honoured, or it punishes. That's what the elder told you when a young man once stole dried meat from the winter cache. He hid it in his furs, ate it alone, in silence. By the next moon, he was dead not from poison, but from a fall, an accident, a twist of fate so fast it felt like judgment. People still talk about it. They never say his name. Wounds, too, have their own ceremonies. Not just the cleaning or the binding, though, that matters. It's what happens while the wound heals. Stories are told then. Always stories. Sometimes myths, the boy who became a fox to escape a bear, the woman who dug a hole so deep it reached the dead. Sometimes real ones, how someone lost a finger to frostbite, but kept walking for 3 days to bring fire back to the cave. The stories aren't just distractions. They're medicine, because the body breaks easily, but the mind? That takes longer, and you've seen what happens when it finally does. A woman who wouldn't eat, even when food was warm in front of her. She just stared, for days, until she stopped blinking. They buried her in the shallows beneath a cairn of white stones, and no one ever used her sleeping spot again. The world is heavy here, and no one carries it alone. That's what the stories are for. Weather is another kind of god. It can kill faster than any beast. You've learned how to smell a storm not just in the air, but in the way the birds fly lower, the trees creak differently, the fire struggles to breathe. You know the sound of snow when it falls soft and harmless, versus the kind that smothers a man in his sleep. There are omens too. A ring around the moon means cold that breaks bones. A flock of crows flying west at dusk means bad meat ahead. You've seen a rain so hard it washed away your cousin's shelter, their fire, their tools, even their footprints, as if they were never there. They came back soaked and shaking. They didn't speak for days. You've learned to read the sky like it's a parent distant, angry, beautiful, unknowable. But you've also learned to prepare. Your people build windbreaks from mammoth rib cages, tie furs to stone with gut strings, dig burrows in snowbanks to trap body heat. You hang fish over slow smoke, pack meat in ice, bury eggs in clay. You sharpen tools every evening, even if you don't need them, because sharpness is life. Dull is death. You rotate guards when you camp in the open, even if no threat is seen, because the worst kind of death is the one that waits until you close your eyes. And you listen. To the fire, to the wind, to each other. Because silence here means something's wrong. It's not just logistics. It's not just caution. It's care. That's the word you don't have in your tongue, but feel in your gut. Care is why the elders sleep closest to the warmth. Why the youngest are fed first when rations run low. Why the old man, who hasn't hunted in 3 winters, still gets the first sip of broth. Because he remembers things the rest of you don't. Because when he dies, those memories die too. And you can't afford to lose more knowledge. Because knowledge is survival, not just of the body of the people. Which is why, when someone breaks a bone, you don't just heal it, you paint it too. You carve stories into crutches. You sing to the ones who cannot walk. You whisper names into beads and sew them into hides, so that no one is ever truly forgotten. When someone dies, their possessions are broken and burned. You don't keep the tools. You don't wear their furs. That would be theft, not of objects, but of meaning. They must return to the earth clean. Sometimes, bones are painted before burial, black for silence, red for journey, white for memory. Sometimes they are left above ground, hidden behind stacked stones, where only the elders go. You've never asked what happens there. You're not ready, but you will be. Because death isn't an ending here. It's a change of role. The dead become watchers, guides, warnings. You feel them in the fire's crackle, in the sounds the wind makes when it passes through the cave mouth just before dawn. You don't pray to them. That's not the word. You honor them. With fire, with song, with silence. You belong to something bigger. Not a tribe, not a family. A chain. Bone to bone. Memory to memory. Flint to flint. And if you do your part, someday someone will sing your story while sharpening your blade. And that's all you can ask for. To be remembered. To matter. Even after the fire goes out. They did not have kings. No thrones. No palaces. No names carved into stone. But make no mistake, Paleolithic societies had order. It wasn't the order of commands or punishments, not the brittle hierarchy of a court or a city. It was older than that, softer, stranger. A kind of balance born from scarcity, from the need to keep everyone alive long enough to see another moon. At first glance, it might seem equal. Men and women both hunted, both gathered. Children learned from whoever would teach them. There were no written laws. But power lived there, quiet as breath. It lived in who got the warmest place by the fire, in who was trusted to keep the fire going when others slept, in who carried the blade, not the one used to cut meat, but the one reserved for rituals, for sacrifices, for protection. There were elders, and then there were the elder. Every group had one, not the oldest by age, but by memory. The one who remembered what the river looked like before the flood, who knew where the cave sang when the wind blew just right, who could smell a bad winter 2 moons away. They didn't lead with commands. They led with stories, with knowing glances, with the terrifying weight of having survived. And people listened. Because to ignore wisdom was to invite death, not dramatic, instant death, but the kind that arrived slow and certain. A misplaced camp, a tainted route, a forgotten trail that vanished under snow. Children had no childhood the way we imagine it. They played, yes, with bones and stones, with songs and mimicry, but they also worked, early, always. By 5, they fetched water and tended fire. By 7, they cleaned hides and set traps. By 10, they helped with the dead. In some groups, boys and girls trained together until their first blood, whether from menstruation or from the open wound of a successful hunt. After that, roles began to form, subtle and varied. Some groups sent the girls to gather and the boys to hunt. Others didn't. It changed with the land, the weather, the memory of famine. Flexibility was not a virtue, it was survival. Those who couldn't adapt didn't last. And yet, even in this world of frozen breath and gnawed bone, there was beauty complex, sacred beauty. They painted. Not just for decoration, not for boredom. They painted in silence, in ceremony. Cave walls across continents, Lascaux, Chauvet, Altamira, tell the same story. Animals that shimmer with motion, hands stenciled in blood-red negative space. Abstract symbols that repeat like a forgotten language. These weren't idle doodles. They were declarations, marks of presence, of fear, of reverence. The act of painting itself was often restricted. Not everyone could do it. The ones who entered the deepest chambers did so with preparation, fasting, chanting, fire, carried like a holy thing. Some say they were shamans. Others say they were chosen. But all agree, the walls weren't just canvas, they were portals to memory, to spirit, to something other. And then there were the carvings. Small figurines, often of women, exaggerated hips, heavy breasts, no faces. The so-called Venus figures. They've been found from France to Siberia, thousands of miles apart, spanning millennia. They weren't toys. They weren't pornography. They were powerful. Maybe fertility charms. Maybe goddesses. Maybe ancestors rendered in symbolic form. No one knows for sure. But the consistency of their shape, the deliberate focus on creation, abundance, and rootedness tells a story. These people revered the life-givers. They knew that death was certain, but life was miraculous. And women, in that equation, were not just necessary. They were sacred. But reverence didn't mean protection. Birth was dangerous. So was sex. So was love. Attachment meant risk. And so bonds were formed not just by blood, but by ritual. A child might be raised by a mother or a grandmother, or a woman unrelated by blood, but bound by shared loss. Men might father children they never raised. The idea of family stretched wide, flexible, adaptive, as everything had to be. Conflict existed. Not in the form of wars, not often, but in the form of disputes over food, over fire, over territory. When violence came, it was direct, personal, a stone to the skull, a spear to the gut. There were no distant generals, no tactics beyond instinct and rage. But there were also mediators, people who calmed storms, Who knew the right words to say when grief became too sharp? Who knew when to tell a story and when to stay silent? They weren't called leaders, but they led. Grief, too, was ritualized. When someone died, the group changed shape. Literally. People moved places in the sleeping arrangement. Fires were relit. Objects were burned. Names weren't spoken for weeks or ever again. Children asked questions. Elders told them only what they needed. The rest was folded into silence. The past wasn't something to worship, it was something to survive. And still, they hoped. They looked at stars and saw patterns. They watched the moon and predicted birth. They buried bones with flowers, with ochre, with beads carved by hand. They believed not in gods with names, not yet, but in something, a presence, a force, a memory that stretched beyond death and whispered back in dreams. Their lives were short, their winters long, their joys brief, sharp, like sunlight on ice. But they were not animals. They were human, utterly. And they understood better than we often do that to be human is to endure the impossible and still find something beautiful to carve into stone. They had no prisons, no written laws, no councils, no crowns, no gallows creaking in the wind. But don't mistake that for chaos. Paleolithic life was built on a social code so deeply embedded it didn't need to be spoken. It was passed through gesture, glance, and consequence. To break, it wasn't just a mistake, it was betrayal. And betrayal, in a world this small, was lethal. There were rules, not many, but each one was heavy. Don't hoard. Don't lie about food. Don't endanger the group. Don't harm the young. And above all, don't break the silence when it matters. Because silence had weight. During a hunt, during a burial, during the moment a woman realized her newborn wasn't breathing. These silences weren't empty, they were sacred. When someone broke a rule, the punishment wasn't immediate. It wasn't even always verbal. It began in the eyes of others, the way their gaze moved around you instead of at you. The way your place near the fire shifted, subtly, one stone further from the center. Social death came before real death. Sometimes that was enough. But if it wasn't, exile came next. Rare, brutal, final. To be cast out wasn't a sentence. It was a ceremony. They would pack a bundle of furs, a small flint kit, and nothing else. No farewells, no names spoken. You didn't scream, you didn't plead. Because if you had brought shame, then your voice no longer mattered. You walked into the cold, and if you lived, you lived. If not well, the snow always had room. But not every transgression ended this way. Some were forgiven, some were healed. Because these people understood something modern minds often forget. You need everyone, even the flawed, even the broken. So if you confessed your mistake early, openly, with dirt on your knees and tears in your mouth, there might be a place for you still. Redemption was real, but rare, and never guaranteed. Gender wasn't a cage here. It was a tool. Men and women both hunted, both cooked, both fought. But their roles shifted with time, with need, with the dance of birth and blood and strength and sickness. A woman who couldn't bear children might become a master tracker. A man too injured to hunt might become the group's firekeeper, or its best healer. What mattered wasn't what you were born to do. It was what you could offer, and what you could carry. Sex was not shameful. It was woven into life, blunt, honest, practical. There was affection, desire, but not the kind shaped by gods or guilt. Pairings happened. Some lasted, some didn't. Sometimes two men shared a tent. Sometimes a woman took multiple lovers over a season, and no one flinched. What mattered wasn't purity. It was harmony. Jealousy existed, of course. But jealousy was dangerous. It cracked the group. So it had to be handled fast through ritual or song or the blunt truth of distance. A fight might be allowed, once supervised, with rules. But if the jealousy stayed, one of them would have to leave. Sex was power, and vulnerability. Pregnancy was a sacred risk. The community bore it together, preparing food, guarding the sleeping mother, singing low chants during labor that blurred the line between pain and prayer. And when a baby was born, it belonged not just to the parents, but to the whole. It was fed by many hands, rocked by many arms, taught by many voices. But if it died, and many did, that grief was private. The mother might paint her face in ash for a week. The father might not speak for a moon. The others would leave offerings in silence. A carved bead, a tuft of fur, a single stone, stacked gently at the cave's edge. They had no word for mental illness. But they had words for sadness, for lostness, for the state of being unmoored. A person who laughed too hard at nothing, or stared too long at fire, or screamed at spirits only they could see they were watched, cared for, kept near the center, not out of pity, out of wisdom, because the edge of the mind was close to the edge of the world, and those who walked it saw things the rest could not. Some were feared, some became shamans, some simply faded. Children weren't coddled. They were tested, trusted, taught by hard lessons. A child who ran into the fire learned what hot meant. A child who wandered too far learned the voice of the wind and what it said when you were alone. But they were also sung too, held, whispered lullabies in languages that never touched paper but were carved into bone and breath. Fear was constant, but so was joy. Laughter happened loud and sudden, over a clumsy fall, or a strange noise from the trees, or the impossible flatulence of a meat-heavy elder. Jokes didn't need punchlines, just surprise. Love wasn't said. It was done. It was a shared hide. A chunk of marrow given without being asked. A bruise checked in silence. A song hummed while cleaning blood from a wound. When two people loved each other, they built small worlds between them, a private gesture, a glance with too much meaning, a shared superstition. Maybe they both believed you had to spit before a hunt, or tie a bit of hair into the slingstone. It didn't matter. It made the cold feel further away. Death was constant. But they never grew numb to it. They wept. They keened that high, ragged cry from the back of the throat that says, I am still here, but barely. They left food for the dead, in case they were hungry. They talked to them. They told stories of them. They remembered how they laughed, or smelled, or cursed, or danced when they thought no one was watching. Grief was not hidden. It was honored, because to grieve meant you were still human, still part of the group, still capable of love. And if you could still love, then maybe, just maybe, the fire would burn another night. And that was enough. They moved. That's what Paleolithic people did best. Not because they were nomads in the way textbooks say, restless, rootless, eternally chasing something. No, they moved because the land told them to. Because staying too long in one place meant death from disease, from depletion, from being found by something faster and hungrier. Mobility was not a symptom of ignorance. It was a system. They knew the seasons like we know traffic patterns. They remembered when the reindeer crossed the valley, when the mammoth herd circled back through the lowland, when the salmon swarmed upriver thick enough to catch with baskets. Territory wasn't owned. It was respected. Groups knew where others camped, knew which rivers were already fished, which valleys had already been stripped of roots and mushrooms. Encroachment wasn't just dangerous, it was foolish. There were no borders, but there were lines. Invisible ones, drawn in memory, in whispered warnings, in stories about the group that never came back. When two groups met, things could go one of two ways. They could trade, or they could vanish. But more often than not, they chose the former, because the alternative meant risk. And risk, in a world this brittle, was unacceptable unless it brought reward. Trade wasn't transactional, it was relational. It didn't begin with, "What do you have?" It began with gestures, gifts, small tokens offered as if to a spirit, a red bead, a polished stone, a tuft of dyed fur. You didn't give your best, you gave what was meaningful. That distinction mattered. Through this system, ideas travelled. Not just goods. A new way to shape a flint blade, a better method for preserving meat, a way of braiding sinew that made the net stronger. These things spread slowly, yes, but with astonishing consistency. Archaeologists today find the same design of a bone needle in campsites, hundreds of miles apart, spanning centuries. That wasn't luck. That was cultural memory at work. Information didn't live in books, it lived in fingers, in scars. In the curve of a tool passed from one hand to another, sharpened a dozen times, adjusted for the left-handed child who would one day carve her own. Children were part of this system, not outside it. From the moment they could walk, they carried things, bits of meat, tools, water bladders. Then they watched, always watching how traps were set, how fish were gutted, how ochre was mixed. There were no apprenticeships, just absorption. A boy who sharpened his flint wrong might cut his own leg. A girl who mixed spoiled fat into a healing paste might infect the elder she loved. Failure wasn't theoretical, so knowledge wasn't optional. Labour, too, was not divided by fairness. It was divided by capability. If you were fast, you hunted. If you were careful, you built traps. If you were strong, you carried meat. If you were clever, you nursed fire. If you were calm under pressure, you helped with births. If you were broken, an old man with a twisted leg, a woman whose lungs rattled when she slept, you taught. No one retired. They shifted, because everyone was needed. Innovation was slow, but constant. They didn't wake up and invent fire one day. They refined, experimented. Some say they used birch bark to create tar for hafting blades, the earliest known glue. That wasn't an accident. That was chemistry by instinct. Trial and error played out over hundreds of years, one burned hand at a time. Textile work began early, too. Nets woven from plant fibre. Baskets shaped with a memory of rain. Even weaving, that ancient code of under and over, began here not as clothing, but as survival tech. The spear thrower, the atlatl, was one of the first engineering leaps. A carved length of antler that turned a human arm into a longer lever, hurling a spear farther, faster, harder. They decorated it. Not because they had time, but because they had pride. Invention wasn't about convenience. It was about edge. Any tool that gave a slight advantage could mean the difference between warmth and freezing, between a kill and an empty night. They didn't waste time. But they still made time to carve, to mark, to create things that didn't directly help them survive, not in the obvious sense. A carved antler shaped into a bird, a stone smoothed and etched with lines that matched lunar cycles. They weren't superstitious. They were observant. Pattern recognition wasn't just a quirk of brain chemistry. It was a tool. And through those patterns, they made meaning. And through meaning, they built continuity. That's how a society survives without buildings, without scrolls, without monuments. By remembering, by teaching the next one in line how to read the wind, how to find the hidden spring, how to hold a body when it's dying, how to listen to what the silence is trying to say. They pass this knowledge forward like flame, one hand to the next, each generation burning slightly differently, but burning still. It didn't end in fire. It ended in forgetting. The Upper Paleolithic world, its people, its songs, its rituals whispered in red ochre, faded not with a scream, but with a slow and grinding silence. There was no apocalypse, no sudden collapse, no final mammoth chase where the last spear missed and the world spun colder. It happened like erosion, like ice melting from inside. And the people didn't die all at once. They changed. Some stayed and dwindled. Some adapted. Some gave birth to the next chapter. The Mesolithic, the Neolithic, agriculture, cities, law, religion, bureaucracy, war. But before all that, before the first seed was planted in dry dirt and called progress, there was still this world. The Paleolithic, the long fire, the bones beneath everything. They were the root system of humanity. And like all root systems, they mostly lived underground, invisible, vast, and vital. For nearly 90% of our species' time on Earth, this was what life was. Cold mornings, shared food, rituals drawn in flickering flame, and stories carved into stone walls so dark you could feel your heartbeat echo in them. And now they're ghosts in our blood. You carry them in your instincts, in your fear of the dark, in the comfort you feel near a fire, in the strange way your heart races when you see a shadow move in the trees. That's not just imagination. It's memory, genetic memory, a fossil of thought. We know the climate shifted, the world warmed. The ice receded, slowly, reluctantly, with a groan so deep the rivers still remember it. As the tundra vanished, so did the megafauna. Mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant sloths. They didn't disappear overnight, but they disappeared. Hunted, yes, but more than that, crowded out. Their grasslands turned to forest. Their roots were broken. Their births couldn't keep up with their deaths. And the humans, your ancestors, had to change with the land. Some began to settle, experimented with planting, stopped moving. And when they stopped moving, everything changed. They built hearths that didn't need to be packed away each morning. They piled stones. They measured seasons, not by the tilt of stars, but by the height of their crops. They tamed animals. Some of them, anyway. Not the clever ones. Not the wolves, who chose to stay beside the fire instead of behind the teeth. But something was lost. The flexibility, the fluidity, the dance of adaptation. Now, there were rules, real ones, not just social pressure laws, property, inheritance, hierarchy. What had once been shared, food, fire, responsibility, began to stratify. And as they dug into the earth, built walls, created cities, they forgot what it meant to depend on each other, not for wealth, but for breath. forgot that knowledge is not stored in books, but in bodies, in gestures, in silent knowing, forgot that memory lives best in motion. But the Stone Age never fully disappeared. It left echoes, in myths of the first fires stolen from the gods, in the hunger for stories told in low light, with soft voices and wide eyes, in your hands capable of gripping a spear, a pen, a child, in your eyes still calibrated to detect movement in the dark, still drawn to symmetry, still unsettled by silence. And in our ruins, in the caves of France and Spain and Sulawesi, where handprints stretch across time like bruises, the pigments are still there, still red, still sharp, still telling a story no one remembers, but everyone feels. Archaeologists call them Venus figurines, hearth sites, tool assemblages, but they were lives. They were people. They had names, even if we no longer speak them. They had songs, even if we can't hear them. They had gods, or spirits, or maybe just stories too big for words. They believed that something happened when you touched a wall with your painted hand and said, "I was here." And you can't help but feel that truth. Even now, you are here because they were. And maybe, just maybe, they are not as far from you as you think. Maybe when you lie awake at night, watching shadows move across your ceiling, when you feel drawn to a flame, when a piece of music moves you for reasons you can't explain, that's them, still watching, still surviving, still part of you. Even after the fire has gone out, Charles Stewart woke before dawn. January 30th, 1649, London. The cold wasn't unfamiliar, but this morning it felt theatrical, calculated. The kind of cold that freezes tears before they can fall. The kind that bites even through velvet and conviction. They came to wake him just before 5. He'd slept in St. James's Palace the night before, in a room with a single candle and the sound of distant voices through the stone walls. He'd slept not because he wasn't afraid, but because there was no point in not sleeping. The execution was scheduled. The scaffold was being built as he dreamed. His fate had already passed through too many hands to be stopped by lack of rest. He dressed deliberately. A thick shirt, another layered beneath it, a woolen undershirt over both. Not vanity, practicality. He didn't want to shiver. It wasn't fear he feared being seen. It was the appearance of fear. If the King of England was going to die, he would die with stillness, with dignity, with the certainty that comes only from either madness or faith. Some said he had both. He was 50 years old. Not young, but not old enough to die in public. He'd been king for 24 years, long enough to have broken Parliament, broken the church, broken the country in two, and rebuilt it in his image, but not strong enough to hold it. The war had already burned through the land. 3 civil wars, technically, each more bitter than the last. Brother against brother, crown against commons. The kind of conflict that splits more than borders. It splits loyalties, cities, families. Charles had watched it all happen, and he'd still believed, even up to the end, that kingship was sacred. Not legal, not elected, sacred. He believed, truly, deeply, dangerously, that his crown had been placed by the hand of God, that he ruled not because of laws, but because he was the law, a vessel, a divine appointment, anointed. That belief was carved into his spine, and in the end, it was what killed him. At 9, they led him through the banqueting house, through the same building where Rubens's ceiling paintings still told stories of divine monarchy, heaven's blessing upon earthbound rule. Charles looked up as he passed beneath them. He was the story now. Outside, a crowd had gathered. Not vast, not like a coronation or festival, but dense, watchful, full of the kinds of faces that stay quiet, not out of respect, but out of shock. Some had come for justice, some had come for vengeance. Some had come because, deep down, they didn't believe it was real until they saw it. No one had ever executed a king like this before, not in England. Kings had been deposed, murdered, assassinated, but never tried, never sentenced, never beheaded in public by law. This was something new. Revolution, written in blood. The scaffold was draped in black cloth. It creaked underfoot. Snow crunched beneath the boots of the guards. The air smelled of iron and pine resin. The executioner stood waiting, masked, silent. He'd sharpened his axe 4 times that morning. Not because it needed it, because he did. Charles stepped forward. He looked smaller than he once had. Thinner, paler. His beard, once a royal flourish, now made him look like a biblical prophet, too tired to finish his sermon. He asked for 2 things: a moment to pray, and a second shirt in case the first grew damp. No one wanted a shivering king. He spoke, briefly, not to the crowd, but to the few close enough to hear him, his bishop, the guards, a handful of witnesses. His words were calm, careful, measured like scripture. He declared his innocence. He reaffirmed his belief in monarchy, not as privilege, but as divine order. He forgave those who brought him here, not in anger, but in pity. He said nothing to his wife. She was in France. He whispered to God instead. Then he removed his cloak, kneeled, and stretched his neck across the block like it was routine. The signal was a single raised hand. The axe rose. And then, silence. A sharp, awful kind of silence, like the air had turned solid. Then the blow. Clean, not fast, not poetic, but final. The head rolled, not far, onto black cloth. The body slumped sideways, twitching. Someone held the head up. "Behold the head of a traitor," they said. But the voice cracked. Even in that moment, no one quite knew what had just happened. A man had died. A king had been unmade. A new world had been born, and no one was ready. The executioner wiped the blade with cloth, handed it to an assistant, and disappeared into anonymity. He would live the rest of his life under shadow, refusing to speak of what he'd done. There was no glory in this act, only necessity. Crowds dispersed in stunned quiet. Some wept. Some cheered. Some simply walked away, unsure of what came next. It would be 11 more years before the monarchy returned Charles II, the son of the dead king, riding into a city still unsure if it had chosen the right version of history. But for now, in that moment, England had no king, just a severed head, and a silence where a crown used to be. The courtroom smelled of sweat and damp wool. That's what most people don't remember when they think of the trial of Charles I. Not the politics, the speeches, or the infamous silence, but the air, heavy, thick, charged. As if the walls themselves weren't sure whether they were about to witness justice or sacrilege. It began on January 20, 1649. Westminster Hall. Cold, crowded. Over 200 commissioners present, flanked by guards, clerks, soldiers, all assembled not to hear a case, but to make history. because this had never happened before. A king placed on trial, not assassinated behind closed doors, not dethroned by foreign invaders, tried as a criminal, as a traitor, as a man. The High Court of Justice had been created by Parliament just weeks earlier with one purpose: to pass judgment on Charles Stuart, that man of blood, who had, by their declaration, traitorously and maliciously levied war against the present Parliament and the people therein represented. Charles entered the hall with the practised serenity of a man who believed even now that the whole thing was a mistake, or a joke, or a nightmare from which someone else, surely, would awaken first. He wore black, not mourning. Authority, a long cloak, a velvet cap, gloves he would remove slowly, methodically, as if reminding everyone he still had the power of patience. He was not a broken man. Not yet. But he was alone. His allies were scattered dead, in hiding or already swearing loyalty to the new model army. His wife, Henrietta Maria, was still in France. His children were in different parts of the realm. His crown had been melted down, his court disbanded, his divine right now nothing more than a philosophical debate. But Charles, he still believed, and that belief showed in every word he refused to speak, because that was his strategy. Silence, contempt, refusal. From the first moment, Charles challenged the court's authority, not with rage, with legal precision. He denied the legitimacy of the proceedings. "I am the king," he said. "By what authority do you try me?" The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was terror, because no one truly knew the answer. They were improvising law, stitching together a justice system mid-air, hoping it would hold long enough to survive this one act. The monarchy had claimed divine authority for centuries. Now, men were saying authority came from the people, and they needed to prove it, with a sword in one hand and a pen in the other. So they ignored him. That was the strategy of the prosecution. Ignore his questions. Proceed as if he were already condemned. Charge after charge was read aloud: that he had levied war against his own people, that he had violated the trust placed in him, that he had caused the deaths of thousands, that he had governed not as a servant of the people, but as their enemy. Charles did not offer a defense. He repeated, calmly, that no court had the right to try a monarch, that this was an affront not just to him, but to the crown itself, to every future monarch, to the very concept of ordained rule. His voice did not tremble, but something in the room did. On the second day, he gestured toward the crowd, gathered behind the guards. "I see the power which you exercise," he said. "I see it, but I do not acknowledge it." Some of the commissioners avoided eye contact. Some stared harder. Some just counted seconds in their heads, praying the moment would pass. But the people, the real people, were watching too. Not just inside the courtroom, outside. Across London, across the country. Merchants, clergy, soldiers, servants. Everyone waited for the outcome, not because they doubted the guilt, but because they doubted the process. If a king could be tried, what else was possible? On the fourth day, Charles was removed from the courtroom for interrupting the proceedings too many times. That was the turning point. After that, his presence became symbolic. The trial proceeded with witnesses, soldiers, citizens, survivors testifying about the war, the orders given, the sieges held, names of cities burned, casualties measured in numbers too large to mean anything real. It was political theatre, but not without purpose. They needed legitimacy, not just a verdict justification. The The sentence came quickly. He was declared guilty of tyranny, of treason, of murder. The final vote, 59 commissioners signed the death warrant. Some hesitated. Some later claimed they'd been pressured. Others died with their signatures burned into history, men who believed they were birthing a new kind of justice. The execution date was set. Charles requested a clean axe. It was granted. He asked to die facing the sky. He would. What did it mean? That was the question echoing through every corridor in London. Was it justice? Revenge? A necessary break from centuries of oppression? Or a mistake so grand it would haunt every ruler after? Charles himself answered none of this. In his final days, he wrote letters to his children, not full of fear, full of instruction. He told them to forgive his killers, to trust in God, to remember that kingship was not a right earned, but a responsibility bestowed. He believed that, even when no one else did, even when the blade fell, even when the people, watching through tears or smirks or trembling hands, realized what had just happened. The King of England had been tried like a common criminal and found guilty. History had shifted. The divine right of kings had cracked, not with a revolution, but with a gavel. The king was dead. But no one quite knew what came next. The scaffold was dismantled the next morning, quietly, efficiently. The block was removed, the black drapes folded. No memorial, no ceremony. Just sawdust and silence, swept into the corners of history like blood under floorboards. Outside Whitehall, London moved on. Shops reopened, bread was sold, bells rang, not for morning, but for market. It was as if the city had held its breath for too long, and was now gasping, trying to find a new rhythm in a world where royalty no longer existed. Except it hadn't really disappeared. Not yet. Not in the minds of the people. Not in the corners of the realm where loyalty still whispered from pews and parlours and battle-scarred manors. Charles I was dead, yes, but martyrdom is its own kind of monarchy. And power abhors a vacuum. Into that vacuum stepped Oliver Cromwell. Not a king. A general. A Puritan. A man who had once stood before Parliament and wept, declaring he had no desire for glory, only justice. Now he was Lord Protector. Not a crown, but close enough. And it made everyone nervous. Cromwell was not charming, not magnetic, not royal, but he was efficient, unrelenting. He didn't rise to power by bloodline, he rose because he won. On battlefield after battlefield, Naseby, Marston Moor, Preston, he crushed royalist forces with a methodical rage. His new model army didn't just fight, it converted. It carried with it the fire of radical Protestantism, the dream of a cleansed nation. Now Cromwell had to govern, and he did with laws, with order, with fear. He banned theatres. He outlawed Christmas. He declared that England would be governed by godly men. And he meant it. The monarchy was replaced by a commonwealth, a republic. On paper, it looked bold, new, revolutionary. In practice, it was brittle. Parliament, once the voice of the people, had become an echo chamber of factions. Levellers, Fifth Monarchists, Republicans, Presbyterians, everyone wanted a different future, and no one could agree on the shape of it. Meetings devolved into shouting. Reforms stalled. Ideals shattered on the rocks of practicality. Cromwell lost patience. He shut Parliament down by force, called them a pack of drunken knaves and unjust men. Then, with reluctant authority, assumed personal rule. The Republic was dead before it began. The people, tired from war, from food shortages, from endless sermons and uncertain futures, didn't resist. Not openly. They obeyed, paid taxes, lowered their voices when speaking of the past. But in taverns, names were whispered. Charles, the rightful king, the boy in exile, Charles II. Because somewhere in France, that boy, now a man, was watching, waiting. Cromwell ruled for nearly a decade. He restructured the military, maintained stability, invaded Ireland with horrific brutality, drove Puritan morality into the marrow of the country. He was, by all technical measures, effective, but he never wore the crown. He refused it. Though Parliament offered it, though his advisers pushed for it, though many feared the chaos that would come after him, Cromwell would not be king. He'd killed a king. He could not become one. When he died in 1658, it wasn't with a bang. It was with illness, quiet, uneventful, and with him the scaffolding holding the New England together began to collapse. His son Richard inherited the protectorate, briefly, but Richard was not his father. He lacked authority, charisma, the will to govern through force. He resigned within months. The Republic began to unravel. In 1660, just 11 years after Charles I was executed, the monarchy returned. Charles II, son of the dead king, landed at Dover to a hero's welcome. Banners, bells, streets lined with people cheering for a future that looked a lot like the past. They called it the Restoration. But something had changed. Charles II would never claim divine right the way his father did. He ruled with caution, with compromise, because he knew everyone knew what happened to kings who forgot where power came from. But England itself, it was no longer innocent. It had tasted regicide. It had looked monarchy in the eye and said, "Not if we say no." And that could never be undone. Even as the crown was polished again, even as Parliament bent its knee, even as Charles II restored the rituals of royalty beneath it, all was the lingering question: could it happen again? Would it? The answer would come centuries later, in France, in Russia, in revolution after revolution, but it began here. With a courtroom, a gavel, an axe, and a silence no crown could ever quite fill. The wind has teeth, and it's been biting since August. You are a sailor aboard the HMS Erebus, and your breath hangs in the air like a ghost that refuses to leave. Every exhale is a prayer. Every inhale risks freezing the inside of your lungs. It is 1847. You are somewhere above the Arctic Circle, and you are going to die here. But no one says it yet. You left England 2 years ago, 1845, with banners, cheers, medals in waiting. You were part of the mission, the one that would finally solve the last great puzzle of the British Empire, the Northwest Passage. That elusive corridor through the top of the world, icy, unpredictable, deadly, that would, if found, connect the Atlantic to the Pacific and change trade forever. 2 ships, Erebus and Terror, 129 men between them, loaded with the best technology of the day, steam engines, tin rations, reinforced hulls, and even a small library. You had a dog on board, a barrel, organ, lemon juice to fight scurvy. There were silver teaspoons engraved with initials, portraits of wives, lovers, forgotten children. You were prepared, or so you thought. No one told you the Arctic doesn't care about preparation. The ice came early, that first winter. You weren't worried at first. Ice was part of the plan. You were meant to overwinter. The ships were designed for it, fitted with stoves, extra insulation, cases of tinned meat, stacked like bricks. Spirits were high. You played cards, read aloud, sang. But by the second winter, something was wrong. The ice didn't melt. The sky stayed grey for weeks at a time. Men began to cough. And not just cough bleed. From the gums, from the eyes. Hands turning black around the fingernails. Teeth falling out. You knew what it meant, even before the surgeon said it. Scurvy. Despite the lemon juice, despite the crates of canned peas, something was missing, or poisoned, or worse, spoiled. It didn't help that the meat tasted strange. Oily, metallic, wrong. Some said the tins had gone bad, the soldering done poorly. Some said it was lead poisoning. Others whispered darker things. But by then, it was too late. Because you were stuck? The ice had your ships in a vice, Wood groaned. Nails popped. You could feel the Erebus shudder at night like it was dreaming of splinters. Then the deaths began, one by one. Pneumonia, frostbite, infection. A man slipped on the ice and snapped his femur like a branch. He screamed for 7 hours before someone smothered him with a blanket. Discipline began to fray. Men stole food. Men hoarded biscuits. Men vanished into the dark, whispering names that didn't belong to anyone aboard. You kept journals at first, tried to stay proper, detailed. April threered, temperature dropped again. Mr. Hodgson lost another toe. April 11th, sighted an Arctic fox, killed it, tasted awful. April 14th, Officer Fitzjames stopped speaking mid-sentence and hasn't blinked since. Then you stopped writing, because words no longer mattered. You remember the last time the ships creaked beneath your feet, June 1847. The ice cracked, briefly, enough to give you hope, enough to make some of the officers whisper that you might move again, that maybe you wouldn't die out here after all. But the ice sealed again by morning, harder than before, and hope, once tasted, rotted faster than meat. That's when the desertion began. Not formal, not announced. Men simply packed small sledges, took a compass, and walked. South. Always south. It was a gamble. There were supposed to be caches on the mainland, rescue parties, Inuit guides. But the mainland was 800 miles of snow, wind, and the kind of cold that cracks your bones from the inside. Some made it 30 miles. Some made it 2. Their bodies were found later by Inuit hunters, by Royal Navy search teams, by historians, a century too late. Flesh stripped from bones, skulls cracked open. Some said it was animals. Some said it was not. You stayed, because movement meant death, because you still believed someone was coming, but they didn't, not in time. When spring returned, what was left of you stepped off the ship and into a landscape that had no place for men. You saw hallucinations. You dreamed of green fields, of bread, of fire. Your fingernails curled backward. Your lips bled and refused to heal. And still you marched, dragging sledges filled with books, silverware, and polished buttons. Things that didn't matter anymore, things that never mattered. It was madness. But what else was there to carry? Your last memory is of a white horizon and a dark figure walking toward you, wearing a coat made of seal hide and eyes that did not blink. You thought he was death. You were wrong. He was Inuit. and he remembered you. Not you, exactly, but your kind. The ones who came with flags and rifles and names too long for the ice to pronounce. The ones who did not listen when told to wait, to turn back, to leave before the hunger came. He would tell the story later, of the white men with sunken eyes, of the ships locked in the frozen sea, of the bones found beside burned kettles and broken teeth, of the handprints in the snow, some large, some too small. He would tell the story, and it would become legend, not of explorers, but of ghosts. And those who searched for you, the next wave of British ships sent north in hope and desperation, they found only remnants. A boot, a silver fork, a journal half filled, a note pinned to a cairn. April 25, 1848. Ships deserted, 105 souls remaining. And that was it. No answers, no closure, just wind and ice, and a mystery that never quite thawed. The Arctic did not forgive. It swallowed ships whole. It buried men beneath endless snowdrifts and cracked ice, and it hid its secrets well. Search parties set out almost immediately after the Franklin expedition failed to return. They ventured northward, following the faintest hints, a dropped tool, a faded footprint, a word scratched into bark. Year after year, decade after decade, each expedition faced the same brutal reality. Arctic cold was no respecter of rank or ambition. In 1854, a team led by Dr. John Ray learned from Inuit hunters that the doomed sailors had resorted to cannibalism. The news shocked Victorian England. The idea that British gentlemen officers trained at sea and school could descend into such desperation was unthinkable. Reports were hushed, dismissed, even denied. But the Inuit accounts were detailed. They described bones marked with cuts consistent with butchering. They spoke of men starving, fighting, dying not with dignity, but raw, animal survival. Scientific analysis decades later confirmed elevated lead levels in preserved skeletal remains, likely from contaminated canned food and the ship's water systems exacerbating the men's decline. Autopsies on recovered bodies showed evidence of malnutrition, scurvy, and possibly tuberculosis. Some bones bore fractures from blunt force trauma, suggesting violence within the desperate group. The very ships designed to bring glory became tombs. In 2014 and 2016, the wrecks of HMS Erebus and HMS Terror were discovered, lying silently beneath Arctic waters. The ships, frozen in time, offered new clues, artifacts preserved in cold, journals still legible, evidence of the crew's final days. But the human story remained the hardest to piece together. Letters found among personal effects revealed hopes and fears, camaraderie and despair. A surgeon's note on lead poisoning, a captain's farewell, an officer's desperate sketch of a map marking the last known position. The Franklin expedition endures not as a tale of conquest, but of hubris, of nature's indifferent power, of men pushed beyond the limits of endurance, and of a silence more profound than the Arctic night, the silence of lives lost and stories left unfinished. They were explorers. They were victims. They were ghosts etched in ice. And the world still asks, what really happened to them? Why did the ships become prisons? How did men trained to command and survive unravel in the white void? No one knows for sure, but the bones whisper, the ice remembers, And the legacy of the Franklin expedition remains a haunting testament to human fragility against the unforgiving Arctic. The walls of Baghdad did not stand a chance. January 1258. The city that once glittered like a jewel on the Tigris was now a fortress bracing for oblivion. The Mongols had come. Led by Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis, their army numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Horses' hooves thundered like storms, banners snapping in the cold wind. Baghdad was the heart of the Abbasid Caliphate, a beacon of knowledge, art, science, and religion. Its libraries housed thousands of manuscripts. Its streets bustled with scholars, poets, merchants, and philosophers. But all that brilliance meant nothing against the Mongol war machine. The siege began with relentless bombardment. Catapults hurled flaming projectiles, cracking walls, and setting wooden structures ablaze. The Tigris River, once a source of life and trade, became a barrier and a tomb as bridges were destroyed and escape routes cut off. The defenders fought desperately. Caliph al-Mustasim rallied his troops, but the city's forces were no match for the Mongols' tactics and numbers. Supplies dwindled, starvation set in, desperation grew. On the seventh day, the walls fell. Mongol soldiers poured into the city, their cries echoing through the narrow alleys and grand palaces. The slaughter was merciless. Men, women, and children were slaughtered. Scholars who had spent lifetimes preserving knowledge were executed or thrown into the streets. The grand libraries, including the famed House of Wisdom, were ransacked. Legend holds that the Tigris ran black with ink from the destroyed books and red with the blood of the scholars. Buildings were razed, mosques desecrated. The city was left a smouldering ruin. Caliph al-Mustasim was captured. His fate was brutal and symbolic. Some say he was wrapped in a carpet and trampled by horses, denied the dignity of death by the sword. Others whisper of darker endings. Whatever the truth, the message was clear. The old order was finished. Baghdad's destruction marked the end of the Islamic Golden Age. Its libraries and schools lost. The city took centuries to recover. But the Mongols' conquest wasn't just devastation. It reshaped the Middle East. Trade routes shifted. Power dynamics changed. Ideas moved along new paths. And from the ashes rose new centers of culture and learning in Cairo, Damascus, Istanbul. The siege of Baghdad is a brutal reminder of how fragile civilization can be. How knowledge, once lost, can echo through centuries as a ghost. And how power, wielded without mercy, can burn the brightest cities to dust. Yet, even in destruction, the human spirit endures. Stories survive. Histories are rewritten. And cities, like people, rise again.